today, I want to say it was my last fight. And no way I'm going to come here without my father.
Man, this is the most dominant fighter. And I know that's a big statement, but I feel very comfortable saying that statement.
Is Khabib the best grappler that the sport of MMA has ever seen?
Yeah, definitely.
What do you think Khabib's going to do now?
Khabib?
Yeah.
Well, he does whatever the fuck he wants to do. That's what I think. I think that guy's probably the best lightweight of all time. He's a monster.
Incredible.
If he catch you, he doesn't let you lose. He will make you suffer in the ring, and you don't only suffer, he makes you give up in a way that looks very bad. He goes 5 rounds and he goes full speed.
If you're fighting in UFC, you have to think like you are the best. If you think, oh, I'm number 10, I'm number 15, you have to go home and sit down in the home and watching UFC on the TV.
October 2021. Khabib Nurmagomedov. Retired. 29-0. The most dominant lightweight champion this sport has ever seen. He sits down at a press table. Nothing to sell. Nobody to promote. No contract on the line. And he says this: Islam Makhachev is going to be the best fighter in the world. The room moves on. Journalists ask about Oliveira, about Volkanovski, about title fights and PPV matchups. The name Islam Makhachev gets a nod and a polite question, and that's it. Here's the thing. Islam was ranked 9th in the division that day. He'd never headlined a single event, never held a belt. 8 years into his UFC career, and most fans still had to Google him. And the man calling him the future of the sport wasn't a promoter or a manager. It was Khabib Nurmagomedov, who'd spent his entire career proving that his instincts about fighting were better than almost anyone on earth. They weren't just teammates, they'd trained together since childhood, under Abdulmanap Nurmagomedov, Khabib's father, one of the most respected combat sports coaches in Dagestani history. Khabib had watched Islam train for 20 years. He knew what was coming. He said what he knew. Nobody listened. To understand why Khabib was right when the world was wrong, you have to understand exactly what he saw in Islam Makhachev that no ranking in the world could measure. Islam Makhachev hadn't just been winning fights. He'd been taking people apart, methodically, patiently, the way you dismantle something when you're not in a hurry because you already know how it ends. Look at the stretch leading up to his title shot. In July 2021, he submitted Thiago Moises with a rear naked choke in the 4th round. Moises came in with a solid record and a ground game of his own. It didn't matter. Islam spent 3 rounds setting traps that Moises didn't know were traps, and by the 4th, there was nowhere left to go. Then came Dan Hooker. Hooker was a veteran. He took the fight on short notice, but he was still a legitimate lightweight with real weapons, long, dangerous experience. Islam submitted him via Kimura at 225 of the 1st round. Not the 2nd round. Not deep into a grinding war. 2 minutes and 25 seconds. Hooker had no answer for where the danger was coming from, and by the time he found it, his arm was nearly broken. Then, Bobby Green. Green was on a run, vocal about wanting to fight top contenders, confident on the feet. Makhachev finished him by TKO at 3:23 of round 1. Green came in talking. He left in 3 minutes. 3 fights, 3 finishes. 3 opponents who all walked in with something to offer, and couldn't find a way to make any of it matter. The method wasn't power. It wasn't speed. It was positioning. Islam doesn't just take the fight where he wants it. He makes you feel like every option you had was already accounted for before you threw your first strike. His entire fighting system is built on positional control and chain wrestling, using trips and body locks from the clinch, wearing opponents down with top pressure rather than explosive finishing attempts. By the time you recognize the danger, the takedown has already happened. The cage becomes a completely different place when he's in it. That's not a style. That's a posture. And it's one that the lightweight division, in 2021, had no framework to deal with. But here's what the MMA world was saying at the time. Islam was too inactive. He'd never been tested by a top 5 striker. He'd never headlined a PPV. He hadn't been in a championship round. The conversation around his title shot was filled with qualifiers and caveats. Maybe after one more fight, let's see him against a real name first. Khabib's just promoting his teammate. Every explanation in the world, except the real one. What everyone called a resume gap, Khabib had been calling a system working exactly as designed. Islam wasn't being protected. He was being built. There's a difference, and almost nobody in the media understood it. After Khabib retired, he transitioned into a coaching role and guided Islam to ascend the ranks of the UFC lightweight division. Think about what that actually means. Khabib had every door open to him. Broadcast deals, promotional opportunities, the kind of global profile that most retired champions spend years trying to monetize. He chose to be in the gym. He chose to be in Islam's corner. He chose to make that his primary occupation after the most dominant championship run the 155-pound division had ever seen. That's not what loyalty looks like. That's what certainty looks like. What Khabib saw wasn't potential. He'd watched Islam train since they were teenagers in Dagestan, both trained under Abdulmanap Nurmagomedov, learning the same Dagestani system, the same positional philosophy, the same relentless pressure game. Khabib didn't need the UFC rankings to tell him what Islam was. He had 20 years of evidence that no scouting report would ever capture. Javier Mendez, head coach at the American Kickboxing Academy, noted that Khabib was very hands-on with Islam, directly involved in every aspect of his preparation, not watching from the side, not offering advice between rounds, hands on the mat, drilling, sparring, shaping. The man who retired undefeated was pouring everything he knew into one fighter. That didn't make headlines the way a comeback announcement would have. Nobody clipped it. Nobody ran segments on it. But that daily, unglamorous investment was Khabib telling the world something far louder than anything he said at a press table. Analysts kept saying Islam needed a higher profile win before anyone could take the title conversation seriously. What they were actually asking for was permission to believe what they could already see. They needed a name they recognized to validate what the footage was already showing them. They just hadn't learned to trust their own eyes yet. Islam had gone to war with every serious lightweight in Dagestan for a decade before he stepped into the UFC octagon against any of them. The octagon was the public exam. The real test had already been happening in private, and he'd been passing it for years. Khabib could have gone anywhere after he retired. He had money. Real money. He had a name recognized from New York to Abu Dhabi. He had media offers, broadcast deals, promotional conversations. The kind of post-career runway that most fighters spend their entire careers hoping to earn. He went back to the gym. He went back to Islam. Consider what that actually means. This wasn't a training partner helping a friend stay sharp. Rizvan Magomedov, VP of International Talent at Dominance, MMA Management, put it plainly. They are not just friends, they are brothers. They have been training together for their entire lives. That's the context. Not a mentor and a student. Not a champion passing down tips to a promising teammate. Two men who had built themselves inside the same system, in the same gym, under the same late father figure. And one of them, the one who'd already proven everything he had to prove, deciding that the most important thing he could do with the rest of his career was make sure the other one got where he was always going. That's not a coaching decision. That is a man who looked at Islam Makhachev and saw something so clearly, so completely, that walking away from it was never a real option. The most accurate evaluator in the history of the lightweight division had made his call. He wasn't waiting for the rankings to catch up. He already knew. Here's what Khabib actually did after he retired. He said Islam was going to be the best in the world, in interviews. He said it through his training choices by building his entire post-retirement life around one fighter's preparation. He said it by being physically present in the corner at UFC 280, cage side in Abu Dhabi, when the moment he'd been pointing to finally arrived. He said it every single time anyone with a microphone asked him who the next champion would be. And he never once changed his answer, never softened it, never added a qualifier. He said it with complete plainness, every time, for years. Every piece of that is evidence. All of it points in the same direction. Now remember what we said earlier. The octagon was the public exam. The real test had already been happening in private. On October 22nd, 2022, inside the Etihad Arena in Abu Dhabi, Islam Makhachev submitted Charles Oliveira with an arm triangle choke at 3:17 of round 2 and became the undisputed UFC lightweight champion. Oliveira was carrying an 11-fight UFC win streak into that night. He was the greatest finisher in UFC history. He was the betting favorite. The broader MMA world framed the whole event as Islam's chance to prove himself, his audition, his coming out party, the moment where we'd finally find out if the hype was real. Khabib was in Islam's corner that night. And when it was over, when Islam handed him the belt, Khabib didn't look surprised. He didn't look relieved. He immediately declared Islam the top pound-for-pound fighter in the world, and then started talking about the next fight. That's not the reaction of a man who just watched something unexpected happen. The world called it a coming-out party. Khabib called it a confirmation, and the difference between those two words is the entire argument. A coming-out party means nobody knew. A confirmation means one person always did, and spent years saying so out loud, while the rest of the world filed it away and moved on. Every headline after UFC 280 ran the same way. Islam Makhachev arrives. A new king in the lightweight division. The next great champion is here. All of it framed as a surprise. All of it written as though something unexpected had just happened inside that arena. Khabib had been telling people this was coming since 2021. Since before that, if you paid attention to what he was actually doing, not just what he was saying at press tables, but how he was spending his time, what he was building, who he was pouring everything into after he walked away from the sport with nothing left to prove. The MMA media didn't miss Islam Makhachev because the evidence wasn't there. They missed him because the evidence came from a source they decided to discount. They heard loyal teammate when Khabib said future champion. They heard regional pride when he said the best in the world. They translated certainty into bias because it was more comfortable than taking it seriously. Framing Islam's rise as a sudden emergence, rather than the long, documented, publicly announced inevitability it actually was, changes the entire evaluation of what Khabib's retirement really meant. He didn't step away from the sport. He redirected himself toward its next chapter. And he told anyone who would listen exactly what that chapter was going to look like. They just weren't ready to hear it. October 22nd, 2022, Abu Dhabi. Islam Makhachev submits Charles Oliveira with an arm triangle choke at 3:17 of round 2 and becomes the undisputed UFC lightweight champion. The arena erupts. Khabib jumps out of his seat at cage side. He gets into the octagon. Islam tries to hand him the belt, the physical belt, the title, the thing they'd both been building toward for years. Khabib pushes it back. Yours, he says. And then, with the cameras on him and the arena still loud, Khabib looks into the microphone and says, "Last couple of years, I told you guys Islam Makhachev is the best fighter. Not in lightweight. He's the #1 pound-for-pound fighter right now. Today. Not relief. Not vindication. Not, I told you so." Just the same sentence he'd been saying for years. Stated again, plainly, like a man confirming something that was never actually in question. Khabib had said it cage side that night. All life we trained together. 22 years. And the last couple of years I told you guys. 22 years. He wasn't talking about a prediction. He wasn't talking about a hunch or an instinct or a bold call that happened to pay off. He was talking about 2 decades of watching the same man, in the same gym, under the same system, and knowing exactly what the end of that story looked like long before anyone else had even started reading it. He said what he saw. He kept saying it for years. It kept getting filed away as the loyal praise of a teammate, the modest promotion of a countryman, the comfortable explanation that made it easy for the world to nod along and move on without actually listening. It wasn't any of those things. It was the most qualified man in the history of the lightweight division telling you, plainly, exactly what was coming. Khabib didn't predict Islam Makhachev. He introduced him. We just weren't ready to listen.